The smell of vanilla cake and champagne still clings to my memory like a ghost I can't shake. Even now, years later, I can close my eyes and see those string lights wrapped around the magnolia trees in our backyard, each bulb glowing like a tiny promise that was never meant for me. A jazz quartet played softly near the fountain, their music drifting through the warm North Carolina evening, and everywhere I looked, people were laughing, clinking glasses, celebrating. It should have been the most beautiful night of my life. After all, it was my 18th birthday. Except it wasn't, not really. I stood near the edge of the stone patio, watching the crowd swarm around my older sister Victoria like moths to a flame. She wore a champagne-colored dress that caught the light with every movement, her hair swept up in an elegant twist, makeup perfect as always. The cake sat on the center table, a magnificent 4-layer masterpiece covered in buttercream roses and gold leaf. On top, in delicate script, it read, "Happy 18th birthday, Victoria." My stomach twisted when I first saw it that morning. I thought maybe it was a joke, some kind of prank we'd all laugh about later. But no one was laughing. 2 weeks earlier, Victoria had announced at Sunday dinner that she wanted to celebrate her 18th birthday again. Because, as she put it with that charming smile everyone loved. Last year's party was so rushed, I barely got to enjoy it, and I've changed so much since then. I want people to see the real me now. My parents had looked at each other across the table, and then my mother's face softened into that indulgent smile she reserved only for Victoria. "What a fun idea, sweetheart," she'd said. "Your father and I were just saying we wanted to throw a big party this summer anyway." I've been sitting right there at the same table. My 18th birthday was 3 weeks away. I'd been looking forward to it for months, had even started a Pinterest board of decoration ideas. But when I opened my mouth to speak, my father cut me off gently. "Mara, you understand, don't you? Victoria's going through such an exciting time right now with the internship and everything. We'll do something nice for you too. Maybe a dinner at that Italian place you like." That was it. Discussion over. My milestone birthday, the one you're supposed to remember forever, had been handed to my sister like a piece of clothing she borrowed without asking. So here I was, wearing a pale blue dress I'd bought for myself, standing at my own birthday party that celebrated someone else. Every detail had been planned by my mother, Victoria's favorite caterer, Victoria's preferred color scheme. Even the playlist was full of songs Victoria loved. I'd helped set up yesterday, stringing those lights through the trees, arranging the flowers on each table, folding napkins into little swans. My mother had thanked me absently, already on the phone with the photographer, making sure they knew to get plenty of shots of Victoria. This is Revenge Stories, a home for quiet courage and true endings. If you feel my words, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Help us build this community so we can bring more interesting and exciting stories for you from around the world. Your help is much appreciated. Your voice matters here. Your story matters too. The DJ's voice boomed through the speakers, asking everyone to gather around. Let's all give a huge round of applause for the birthday girl, Victoria Chen. The crowd erupted in cheers. Cameras flashed like lightning bugs. My mother stood near the front, her hand pressed to her heart, eyes shining with pride. My father raised his glass high, beaming. Victoria climbed onto the small stage my father had rented specifically for this moment. She took the microphone with practiced ease. She'd always been comfortable in the spotlight, always knew exactly what to say. "Thank you all so much for being here tonight," she began, her voice warm and bright. "I know it's a little unconventional to celebrate the same birthday twice, but honestly, why should we limit joy to just one day a year? Life is short. Celebrate everything while you can, right?" The crowd laughed and clapped. Someone shouted, "Speech! Speech!" Victoria giggled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear in that effortlessly graceful way of hers. "I just want to say how grateful I am for this family, for these friends, for this incredible life I've been given, and to my baby sister Mara." She turned and looked right at me, her smile wide and generous. Thank you for being such a good sport about all of this. You're the best. Everyone turned to look at me then. Dozens of faces, all smiling, all expectant. I forced my lips into something resembling a smile and raised my glass of sparkling cider. My hand shook slightly. No one seemed to notice. The applause swelled again, and then they were cutting the cake, Victoria's perfectly manicured hand over my father's as they sliced through the layers together. I watched from my spot by the patio railing, far enough away that I could pretend I was just another guest. A woman I didn't recognize walked past me with a plate of hors d'oeuvres and said cheerfully, "Your sister is just radiant tonight, isn't she?" "Yes," I heard myself say. "She always is." I'd spent my whole life hearing that. Victoria is so talented. Victoria is so beautiful. Victoria is going places. And I was always the footnote. The, "Oh yes, and their younger daughter too," that came after. Teachers compared us constantly. "You're Victoria's sister?" She was such a bright student. Relatives asked about her college plans, her internships, her boyfriend, and then turned to me as an afterthought. "And how's school going for you, dear?" When I was 14, I'd made Victoria a scrapbook for her birthday. I'd spent weeks on it, collecting photos, writing captions, decorating each page with little drawings and pressed flowers. She'd flipped through it quickly, smiled politely, and said, "This is sweet, Mara, really cute." Then she'd set it aside and open the jewelry box our parents had given her. I'd found the scrapbook weeks later, shoved in the back of her closet, pages already yellowing. That was when I'd started dreaming about leaving. Not running away exactly, but just going somewhere I could be something other than Victoria's little sister. Somewhere I could be Mara, whoever that was. The night wore on. The music got louder, the laughter more raucous. I drifted through the party like a ghost, picking at food I didn't want, smiling at people who barely saw me. At one point, my mother found me near the dessert table. "Mara, sweetheart, could you help Aunt Linda find the bathroom? And then check on the drinks table? I think we're running low on ice." "Sure, Mom." "Thank you, honey. You've been such a help tonight. I don't know what we'd do without you." But she said it without looking at me. Already turning away to greet another guest. I was useful. That was my role. The helper, the assistant, the one who made sure everyone else's moments could shine. Around 10 o'clock, I couldn't take it anymore. The music was pounding in my skull. The laughter felt like mockery. And every time I saw Victoria in the center of that crowd, I felt something dark and heavy pressing against my chest. I slipped away from the party, walking down the side path toward the front of the house. No one called after me. No one noticed. The street was quiet, lit by old-fashioned lampposts that cast yellow pools of light on the sidewalk. I could still hear the party behind me, a dull throb of bass and voices, but it was fading with each step I took. The night air was cooler here, away from the crowd and the lights. I breathed it in deeply, trying to calm the trembling in my hands. I'd left my phone in my purse back at the house, but I had my wallet tucked in the small pocket of my dress. I pulled it out and counted the bills inside. $340. I'd been saving from my summer job at the library, planning to buy a new laptop for college. College. That was supposed to start in 2 months. University of Georgia. Far enough away to feel like freedom, but close enough that my parents expected me home for holidays. But standing there on that empty street, listening to the ghost of my own birthday party, celebrating someone else, something inside me shifted. It wasn't a dramatic moment. No sudden revelation or burst of clarity. It was quieter than that. It was the feeling of a door closing softly, and another one, somewhere far away, beginning to open. I started walking. I didn't have a plan, not really. I just knew I couldn't go back into that house tonight. Maybe not ever. My feet carried me toward downtown, toward the bus station I'd passed 100 times on my way to work. The streets were mostly empty. Just a few cars passing by, a couple walking their dog, a group of teenagers laughing outside a closed coffee shop. When I reached the Greyhound station, the fluorescent lights inside were harsh and uninviting. The waiting area smelled like old coffee and something vaguely industrial. A tired-looking woman sat behind the ticket counter, scrolling through her phone. A digital screen above her head showed departures: Boston, Philadelphia, Atlanta, New York. New York. The word seemed to glow brighter than the others. I'd never been to New York. I'd barely been anywhere except Charlotte and a few family trips to the beach. But I'd seen pictures, read books, imagined what it might be like to be in a place so big that no one would know me, no one would compare me to anyone, no one would expect me to be grateful for scraps of attention. I approached the counter. The woman looked up, eyebrows raised. "Can I help you?" "When's the next bus to New York?" She glanced at her computer. "Leaves in 45 minutes. Last seat available. One way or round trip." I should have hesitated. I should have thought about my parents, about college, about the life I was supposed to live. But all I could see was Victoria's face on that stage, the crowd cheering, my mother's proud smile. All I could feel was the weight of being invisible in my own life. One way. The ticket cost $170. I handed over the bills and watched the woman print out my ticket. She passed it across the counter without ceremony. "Gate 3, boards in 30 minutes. Thank you." I found a seat in the waiting area, tucked in the corner where I could watch the door. Part of me expected my parents to burst through at any moment, to have somehow realized I was gone and tracked me down. But the minutes ticked by, and no one came. Of course they didn't. They were probably still at the party, still laughing and dancing, and toasting to Victoria's eternal youth. I thought about texting them, leaving some kind of note. But what would I even say? "Thanks for forgetting my birthday, I'm leaving now. Hope Victoria enjoyed my party?" It all sounded bitter and childish, and maybe it was, but I didn't care anymore. I was so tired of swallowing my feelings, of being the understanding one, the mature one, the one who never made a fuss. When they called my bus, I stood up and walked toward Gate 3. My heart was pounding, but my steps were steady. I handed my ticket to the driver, climbed the steep steps, and made my way down the narrow aisle. The bus was half empty. I chose a window seat near the back and pressed my forehead against the cool glass. The engine rumbled to life. We pulled out of the station, and I watched the familiar streets of Charlotte slide past, getting smaller and smaller, until they disappeared completely into the darkness. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but my eyes stayed dry. Instead, I felt something else, something I hadn't felt in a very long time. I felt light. Somewhere behind me, in that beautiful house with the magnolia trees and the string lights, my family was probably still celebrating. Maybe someone had finally noticed I was gone. Maybe they were calling my phone, checking the bathrooms, asking if anyone had seen Mara. Or maybe they hadn't noticed at all. Maybe the party would end and they'd all go to bed, and it wouldn't be until morning that someone realized the invisible daughter had finally disappeared. The bus merged onto the highway, and I leaned back in my seat, closing my eyes. The gentle motion was almost soothing. I didn't know what I would do when I got to New York. I didn't know where I would sleep or how I would survive. All I knew was that for the first time in 18 years, I was choosing myself, and that was enough. The bus ride took 14 hours. We stopped twice, once in Richmond and once in Baltimore, but I didn't get off. I sat in my window seat and watched the landscape change from southern pine trees to northeastern industrial sprawl. Other passengers came and went, sleeping or talking quietly on their phones, but I stayed silent, lost in the strange new reality I'd created for myself. Dawn broke somewhere in New Jersey, painting the sky in shades of pink and gray. I dozed off a few times during the night, my head bumping against the window, but I never really slept. My mind was too busy spinning with questions I didn't have answers to. What am I doing? Where will I go? What happens when the money runs out? But underneath the fear was something else, something that kept me from asking the driver to turn around. It was the memory of standing at that party, watching everyone celebrate a birthday that should have been mine, and realizing that if I stayed, I would spend the rest of my life in that same position. Always watching, never living. When we finally pulled into Port Authority, the morning sun was already high and hot. I stepped off the bus into a wave of noise and movement that nearly knocked me back. People rushed past in every direction, their faces set in determined expressions, earbuds in, coffee cups in hand. The air smelled like exhaust and hot asphalt, and something distinctly urban that I couldn't quite place. I stood there for a moment, clutching my small purse, trying to orient myself. The station was massive, a maze of signs and platforms and shops I'd never heard of. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they were going, except me. I found a bathroom and locked myself in a stall, just to breathe for a minute. My reflection in the scratched mirror looked strange. Same face, same dark hair, but something in my eyes was different. Wilder maybe, or just terrified. I splashed cold water on my face and tried to think. First thing, find a place to stay. I couldn't afford a hotel, not for more than a night or two at most. I pulled out my phone, which still had some battery left, and searched for hostels in New York. There were several, but most were booked solid. Finally, I found one in Brooklyn that had a bed available in a shared room. $35 a night. It would have to do. I navigated the subway system through sheer determination and the help of a kind older woman who took pity on my obvious confusion. "First time in the city?" she'd asked, and I'd nodded. "You'll figure it out. Everyone does eventually." The hostel was in a neighborhood called Greenpoint, tucked above a Polish bakery on a street lined with row houses. The entrance was narrow, the stairs steep. Inside, it smelled like old wood and instant coffee. The guy at the front desk barely looked up from his phone when I checked in. "Breakfast is from 7 to 9. No guests after 11. Bathrooms down the hall. Need a lock for your locker?" "Yes, please." He tossed me a small padlock, $5. The room I was assigned to had 4 bunk beds crammed into a space that would have been small for 2 people. Only one other bed was occupied, the bottom bunk near the window. A girl about my age was sprawled across it, headphones on, eyes closed. I took the bunk across from her and sat down on the thin mattress. The springs creaked ominously. This was it. This was my new life. A shared room with strangers, a locker for my belongings, and about $170 left to my name. I should have been panicking. Instead, I felt a strange sense of calm. Maybe it was shock, maybe it was freedom. Either way, I lay back on that uncomfortable mattress and stared at the water-stained ceiling and thought, at least it's mine. I spent the first few days just walking. I'd leave the hostel early in the morning and wander through Brooklyn, then cross the bridge into Manhattan, just taking it all in. The city was overwhelming in every way possible. Too loud, too fast, too crowded, too expensive. But it was also beautiful in a way I hadn't expected. Not the postcard beauty of tourist spots, but the real, gritty beauty of people actually living their lives. I saw street musicians playing for subway change, their music echoing through underground tunnels. I saw artists selling paintings on sidewalks, their work propped against chain-link fences. I saw families from every corner of the world, speaking languages I couldn't identify, selling food from carts that smelled like heaven. Everyone was struggling, everyone was hustling, but everyone was also building something. By the end of the first week, my money was running dangerously low. I needed a job fast. I spent days going from shop to shop, restaurant to restaurant, asking if they were hiring. Most places took one look at my age and obvious inexperience and shook their heads. A few took applications that I knew would never be looked at. Finally, a small cafe in the East Village said yes. It was called The Grind, which felt almost too on the nose. A narrow space with mismatched furniture and walls covered in local art. The owner, a woman in her 50s named Diane, looked me up and down with sharp, appraising eyes. "You ever worked food service before?" "No, but I'm a fast learner." "You got a place to stay?" "Yes." "Can you start tomorrow?" "Yes." She nodded. 6:30 a.m., Don't be late. You'll train for 3 days, then we'll see if you work out. $8 an hour plus tips. It wasn't much, but it was something. I showed up the next morning at 6:15, terrified of being even a minute late. Diane put me on training with a guy named Marcus who taught me how to work the espresso machine, how to take orders without writing them down wrong, how to smile at customers even when they were rude. The work was exhausting. I was on my feet for 8 hours straight, running between tables, steaming milk, wiping down counters. My feet ached, my back hurt, and by the end of each shift, I smelled like coffee grounds and sweat. But when Diane handed me my first cash payment at the end of the week, I felt something close to pride. "You're not bad, kid," she said. "You can stay on if you want." "I want," I said. With steady work, I could afford to move out of the hostel and into a slightly less temporary situation. I found a room in an apartment in Queens, shared with 3 other girls. My room was barely bigger than a closet, with a window that looked out onto a brick wall. But it was mine, $40 a week, utilities included. I bought an air mattress from a thrift store and used my backpack as a pillow. It was the most beautiful room I'd ever had. The girls I lived with were all in their early 20s, working various jobs and chasing various dreams. There was Jasmine, a dancer who waitressed at night, Maria, who was studying nursing and worked as a home health aide, and Keisha, who did makeup for fashion shoots when she could get them and retail when she couldn't. They were kind to me in a distant sort of way, the way you're kind to a roommate you don't really know. At night, after my shifts at the grind, I'd lie on my air mattress and think about home. I wondered if my parents had called the police, if they were worried, if Victoria felt any guilt at all. I'd left my phone on for the first 2 weeks, watching the notifications pile up. Missed calls from Mom, from Dad, from Victoria. Text messages that went from worried to angry to pleading. "Mara, where are you? This isn't funny. Come home now. Please just let us know you're okay. I can't believe you do this to us. Victoria is devastated." That last one made me laugh out loud, a bitter sound that echoed in my tiny room. Victoria was devastated. Of course. Of course this was somehow about her too. Eventually, I turned the phone off completely. Whatever they were feeling, whatever drama was unfolding back in Charlotte, I couldn't be part of it anymore. I needed space, silence, a chance to figure out who I was when no one was watching. The months passed in a blur of early mornings and aching feet. Summer melted into fall, and the city changed with it. The oppressive heat gave way to crisp air and golden light that slanted through the buildings in ways that made even the dirtiest streets look almost beautiful. I started to learn the rhythms of New York, the way the subway crowds shifted throughout the day, which streets to avoid at night, where to find the cheapest groceries. At the grind, I moved from trainee to trusted employee. Diane started giving me more hours, let me work the register, even asked my opinion on new menu items. The regulars learned my name. There was Mr. Kim, who came in every morning at 7 for a black coffee and a plain bagel. There was the group of NYU students who camped out in the corner for hours, buying one latte and refilling their water cups endlessly. There was the woman in expensive coats who always left a $20 tip no matter what she ordered. I fell into the routine of it, the predictability. Wake up at 5:30, shower in the tiny bathroom I shared with 3 other girls, walk to the subway, ride to the East Village, unlock the cafe, start the coffee. It was simple and hard and mine. But at night, in that room with the brick wall view, I felt something gnawing at me. I'd escaped, yes, I'd proven I could survive on my own. But was this all there was? Working, sleeping, working again? I'd left home to become someone, but I was starting to realize that becoming someone required more than just leaving. I started spending my days off at the public library. I'd discovered it by accident one Sunday, wandering through the West Village, trying to escape the cold. The building was old and beautiful, with high ceilings and rows of books that seemed to stretch on forever. I found a corner on the 3rd floor where almost no one ever came, and I'd sit there for hours, reading. At first, I read novels, losing myself in other people's stories. But gradually, I found myself drawn to the design section. Books about architecture, interior spaces, the psychology of rooms. I'd always loved arranging things, making spaces feel warm and intentional. As a kid, I'd spent hours rearranging my bedroom, trying different configurations, imagining how light would fall at different times of day. Victoria used to make fun of me for it. "Mara's redecorating again," she'd announce to whoever was around. "Must be Tuesday." But sitting in that library, surrounded by books about people who did this for a living, who turned spaces into art, I started to think maybe it wasn't silly. Maybe it was something real. I checked out every book on interior design I could find. I read about the Bauhaus movement, about Feng Shui, about Scandinavian minimalism, and Japanese wabi-sabi. I learned about color theory and spatial flow and how rooms could make people feel safe or anxious, energized or calm. I started sketching, filling cheap notebooks with room layouts and furniture arrangements. One evening, I was sitting in the cafe after my shift, drawing in one of my notebooks, when Diane sat down across from me. "What are you working on?" I almost closed the notebook out of habit, but something stopped me. "Just some room designs. It's nothing really." "Can I see?" I hesitated, then turned the notebook toward her. She studied the page quietly, her expression unreadable. I'd drawn a small cafe, similar to the grind, but reimagined with better flow, more natural light, seating that invited people to stay. "This is good, Mara. Really good." She looked up at me. "You ever think about doing this professionally?" "I don't have training. I didn't go to school for it." "So, half the best designers I know are self-taught." She tapped the drawing. "You've got an eye. That's something you either have or you don't. The rest you can learn." Her words stayed with me for days. I started looking up online courses, free tutorials on design software, YouTube videos about drafting and rendering. I spent my tips on a used laptop from a pawn shop and taught myself the basics of SketchUp and AutoCAD, staying up late into the night, practicing until my eyes burned. It was during one of those late-night practice sessions that I got an email notification. My old email account, the one I'd barely checked since leaving Charlotte. The subject line made my stomach drop. "Please read this, Mara." It was from my mother. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Part of me wanted to delete it without reading, to maintain the clean break I'd made. But another part, the part that was still somebody's daughter, needed to know. The email was long, rambling, full of the kind of emotional language my mother usually avoided. She said they'd been worried sick, that they'd filed a missing persons report, but once the police confirmed I was an adult and had left voluntarily, there was nothing they could do. She said Victoria had been crying for weeks, blaming herself, that my father had driven to Atlanta, thinking I might have gone to UGA anyway. She said they didn't understand why I'd left, what they'd done wrong. "We gave you everything," she wrote. "A beautiful home, good schools, opportunities. I don't understand why that wasn't enough, why we weren't enough." I read it 3 times, feeling my emotions shift with each pass. Anger first, at the complete lack of self-awareness. Then sadness, at how truly they didn't see what they'd done. And finally, something like acceptance. They would never understand. The party wasn't the reason I'd left. It was just the final proof of something I'd known my whole life. That in their eyes, I would always be secondary, always the supporting character in Victoria's story. I didn't respond to the email. Instead, I closed my laptop and looked around my tiny room. The air mattress with its slow leak that I had to reinflate every few days, the milk crate I used as a nightstand, the single poster I'd bought from a street vendor, a black and white photograph of the Brooklyn Bridge at sunrise. It wasn't much, but it was honest. This life might be hard, but at least it was real. Winter came harsh and unforgiving. New York in January was colder than anything I'd experienced in North Carolina. The wind whipped between buildings like it was angry, and the snow that had seemed so magical at first quickly turned to gray slush. My coat wasn't warm enough, my boots weren't waterproof, and the apartment's heating was questionable at best. But I kept going. I picked up extra shifts at the cafe. I kept studying design in every spare moment, and slowly something began to shift. I started to feel less like I was hiding, and more like I was building. One frozen February morning, a woman came into the grind, someone I'd never seen before. She was probably in her 60s, with silver hair cut in a sharp bob, and the kind of elegant style that didn't need labels. She ordered a cappuccino, and sat at a corner table, pulling out a tablet and stylus. I noticed her because she was sketching, and when I brought her coffee to the table, I caught a glimpse of her screen. It was a room design, beautifully rendered, with notes about materials and lighting. "This is beautiful," I said, before I could stop myself. She looked up, surprised. "You know design?" "I'm teaching myself. I'm trying to." She studied me for a moment, then smiled. "Sit down for a minute. What's your name?" "Mara." "I'm Christine Holloway. I run an interior design studio in Soho." She turned her tablet so I could see it better. "This is a project we're working on, converting an old warehouse into a community center." We talked for almost 20 minutes, until Diane gave me a look that said I needed to get back to work. But before Christine left, she handed me her card. "Send me your portfolio," she said. "Even if it's just sketches, I'm always looking for fresh eyes." "I don't really have a portfolio." "Then make one. If you're serious about this, put together your best work and email it to me." She paused at the door. "There's something about the way you looked at that design, like you understood what I was trying to do. That's rare. This is Revenge Stories, a home for quiet courage and true endings. If you feel my words, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Help us build this community so we can bring more interesting and exciting stories for you from around the world. Your help is much appreciated. Your voice matters here. Your story matters too. I spent the next 2 weeks working on a portfolio like my life depended on it. I gathered my best sketches, rendered 3 of them in SketchUp, wrote thoughtful descriptions of my design philosophy. I called it Spaces of Becoming, a collection of room designs meant for people in transition, people who were rebuilding their lives. Each design told a story, a tiny studio apartment that felt spacious through clever use of mirrors and light, a reading nook built into an awkward corner, turning dead space into sanctuary, a community kitchen designed to bring people together rather than separate them. Every space was created with the same question in mind: how do we build homes for people who are learning to be themselves? When I finally sent the portfolio to Christine, I held my breath for 3 days. Then she called. "Can you come to the studio tomorrow, 2 o'clock?" The studio was in a converted loft, with enormous windows and exposed brick walls. Design books lined every surface, and mood boards covered the walls. Christine's team was small, just 3 other designers, all young and intensely focused on their work. Christine walked me through their current projects, asking questions about my portfolio, about my process. Then she stopped and looked at me directly. "I can't pay you much. It would be an internship, basically. 20 hours a week, $15 an hour. But you'd learn everything: drafting, client relations, sourcing, installation. And if it works out, there might be a place for you on the team." I thought about my life, the cafe shifts, the cramped room, the slow grind of survival. This wouldn't change any of that immediately. I'd still need to work at the grind to make rent. But it was a door opening, a path forward. "When can I start?" "Monday." I called Diane that night and asked if I could drop to part-time mornings. She didn't even hesitate. "About time you did something with that brain of yours, kid. We'll make it work." The next 6 months transformed me. I worked at the cafe from 6 to 11, then went straight to the studio, staying until 7 or 8 at night. I was exhausted constantly, living on coffee and cheap bodega sandwiches. But I was also learning at a pace I'd never experienced. Christine was a brilliant but demanding teacher. She'd look at my work and say things like, "The proportions are off. Feel it, don't just measure it." Or, "This is pretty, but pretty isn't the point. What do you want people to feel when they walk into this room?" She taught me that good design wasn't about following trends or copying what you'd seen in magazines. It was about understanding people, understanding light, understanding how space could shape the motion. She sent me to flea markets to learn about materials, to museums to study how great artists used color, to strangers' apartments to understand how real people actually lived. And slowly, I started to develop my own style. I was drawn to spaces that told stories, that incorporated history. I loved using reclaimed materials, old wood with its scratches and stains, vintage fixtures, things that had lived other lives before. Christine called it soulful design. You design like someone who knows what it means to start over, she told me once. There's a depth to your work that most kids your age don't have. By my 19th birthday, I'd been in New York for a year. I didn't celebrate. I thought about calling home, letting them know I was okay, that I'd made it through. But I didn't. Some distance needs to be maintained to heal. Instead, I treated myself to a real dinner, not bodega food or cafe leftovers. I went to a small Italian restaurant in the West Village and sat alone at a corner table, eating pasta and drinking wine that I was technically still too young to order, but the waiter didn't check. I raised my glass in a silent toast to the girl who walked away from a party that wasn't hers, who'd gotten on a bus with no plan, who'd survived a year in a city that ate people alive. I was still broke, still living in a room with a brick wall view, still working 2 jobs and barely sleeping. But I was also becoming something. Not Victoria's sister, not the invisible daughter, just Mara, designer, dreamer, survivor. That felt like enough to celebrate. The real turning point came in the spring of my 2nd year in New York. Christine called me into her office one morning, and I could tell by her expression that something had shifted. I just got offered a project that I think might be perfect for you, she said. It's small and the budget is tight, but the client specifically asked for someone young, someone with fresh ideas. What's the project? A young couple bought a tiny 1-bedroom in Brooklyn. It's basically a box, maybe 500 square feet total. They want to make it feel like a home without doing any major renovations. I told them about your work, showed them your portfolio. They want to meet you. My first solo client. I felt a surge of terror and excitement in equal measure. When? Thursday. I'll come with you for the initial consultation, but if they like your ideas, the project is yours. Full design credit. Sarah and James on a rainy Thursday evening at their apartment in Park Slope. They were both in their late 20s, artists working day jobs to pay rent. Exactly the kind of people whose dreams I understood. The apartment was indeed tiny, with low ceilings and weird angles and a kitchen that was barely more than a hot plate and a mini fridge. But as I walked through the space, I could see the potential. The way morning light came through the east-facing windows. The beautiful old molding they'd painted over but could be restored. The alcove that was currently used for storage but could become something magical. Tell me about yourselves, I said. How do you want to feel when you're home? We talked for 2 hours. They told me about their life, their hopes, the fact that they were trying to start a family but couldn't afford to move. Sarah was a painter who needed space to work. James composed music on his laptop and needed quiet. They wanted something that felt warm, creative, and distinctly theirs. I went home that night and didn't sleep. I sketched and planned and measured. I thought about every cheap trick I'd learned for making small spaces feel larger. Mirrors, light colors, furniture that served multiple purposes. But I also thought about what Christine had taught me. That good design tells a story. The proposal I put together wasn't just about maximizing space. It was about creating zones within the single room, a living area that could become Sarah's painting corner when James was out, a sleeping alcove that felt separate through the use of curtains and lighting, a tiny dining nook by the window that could be James's music space when they weren't eating. I sourced everything from thrift stores and discount suppliers, keeping the whole project under $3,000. When I presented it to them the following week, Sarah started crying. This is exactly what I couldn't figure out how to articulate, she said. You understood what we needed before we did. They hired me on the spot. Christine smiled from her corner of the room, proud and knowing. The installation took 3 weeks. I worked mostly alone, painting walls, assembling furniture, hanging the heavy vintage mirror I'd found at a flea market in Queens. I stayed up late sewing curtains from fabric Sarah had fallen in love with, installing floating shelves for James's vinyl collection, building a custom frame for Sarah's paintings. The day we finished, I stood in the center of that tiny apartment and felt something I'd never experienced before. This space hadn't existed a month ago. These walls had been blank. This room had been formless. And now it was a home. I had done that. Not Victoria, not my parents. Not anyone else, me. Sarah and James invited me to their housewarming party a week later. It was small, just a dozen people crammed into that 500-square-foot space. But everyone was talking about the design. Where did you find this mirror? How did you make the ceiling look taller? Who was your designer? Her name is Mara Chen, Sarah kept saying, pulling me into conversations. She's incredible. She's gonna be huge someday. One of the guests was a writer for a small Brooklyn lifestyle blog. She asked if she could photograph the apartment and interview me about my design process. The article ran 2 weeks later under the headline, How One Designer Transformed a Shoebox into a Dream Home on a Shoestring Budget. It wasn't the New York Times. The blog probably had a few thousand readers at most, but it was my first press, my first proof that I was building something real. Christine printed out the article and hung it in the studio. This is just the beginning, she told me. You ready for what comes next? What came next was more clients. Small projects at first, all word-of-mouth referrals. A studio apartment for a grad student, a playroom for a family in Queens, a home office for a freelance writer. Each one taught me something new, pushed me to solve different problems, to see spaces through different eyes. I developed a reputation for being able to do a lot with a little, for understanding how to make small spaces feel intentional rather than cramped. But more than that, people said I made them feel heard, that I designed spaces that reflected who they actually were, not who they thought they should be. By the time I turned 21, I'd saved enough to move into my own studio apartment. It was still tiny, still in Queens, but it was mine alone. No roommates, no shared bathroom, no strangers' schedules to work around. Just me and my drafting table, and a window that finally looked out at something other than a brick wall. I bought furniture slowly, piece by piece. A real bed instead of an air mattress. A vintage dresser I refinished myself. A small couch from a stoop sale that I reupholstered in fabric I'd been saving for. Each item was chosen carefully, intentionally, telling the story of who I was becoming. And I did it all without help from my family. Every paycheck, every client, every small victory was mine. I'd proven what I'd set out to prove that night I left. That I could exist on my own. That I could build a life that had nothing to do with being someone's sister or someone's daughter. I thought about them sometimes, less often as time passed. I wondered if they still looked for me, if they'd accepted that I was gone, if Victoria had finally had a birthday party that felt like enough. But I didn't reach out. The silence between us had hardened into something permanent, and I wasn't sure there was any way back across it. Christine kept pushing me to think bigger. You're talented enough to have your own firm someday, she'd say. Stop thinking of yourself as an intern who got lucky. But I wasn't ready for that yet. I was still learning, still figuring out my voice. I took on every project I could, even the difficult clients, even the impossible budgets. Each one was practice, preparation for something I couldn't quite see yet, but knew was coming. It was late one evening, working alone in the studio on a rendering, when my phone rang. An unknown number with a Charlotte area code. I stared at it for 3 rings before answering. Hello? Mara? My mother's voice. I hadn't heard it in almost 3 years. It sounded older, more fragile. Hi, Mom. Oh, thank God. Mara? We've been trying to reach you. I know. A long pause. I could hear her breathing, trying to figure out what to say. Your father had a heart attack. The words hit me like cold water. What? When? 2 weeks ago. He's okay. He's stable now. But it was serious. He's been asking for you. I closed my eyes, feeling the old familiar pull. The guilt, the obligation, the weight of being someone's daughter, even when you didn't want to be. I'm sorry that happened. I'm glad he's okay. Will you come home, please, even just for a visit? Home. The word felt foreign, like something from another language. I can't, Mom. I have work. I have clients depending on me. Clients? Her voice shifted, taking on that edge I remembered so well. Mara, your father almost died. Your family needs you. Whatever you're doing up there can wait. And there it was. The assumption that my life was less important, less real, something that could be put on hold for their convenience. No, I said quietly, it can't wait. This is my life now. This is what I do. I don't understand you. Her voice broke. We're your family. How can you just abandon us like this? I could have said so many things. I could have reminded her of the party, of every comparison, of every time she'd chosen Victoria over me without even noticing. But what was the point? She wouldn't hear it. She'd never heard it. I hope Dad recovers fully, I said instead. I really do. But I'm not coming back. Mara! I ended the call. My hand was shaking. I set the phone down and stared at my reflection in the darkened studio window. That girl looking back at me was someone my family wouldn't recognize anymore. She wasn't invisible. She wasn't silent. She built something out of nothing, and she wasn't going to let guilt tear it down. But that night, lying in my own bed in my own apartment, I couldn't stop thinking about my father. Despite everything, I didn't want him to die. I didn't want any of them to suffer. I just wanted them to see me. Really see me. And after 3 years, I was finally accepting that they probably never would. The only question left was whether I could live with that. And as I drifted off to sleep, I realized I already knew the answer. I'd been living with it for 3 years, and somehow, despite the pain, despite the loneliness, I'd built a life I was proud of. That was going to have to be enough. Story continues to conclusion. The years continued to unfold, each one bringing new challenges and small victories. By 23, I'd been featured in 3 design magazines, all small publications, but they mattered. My client list grew beyond referrals. People found me through Instagram, through my website, through articles about young designers to watch. I developed a signature style that editors started calling restorative design. Spaces built around the idea that rooms could heal you, that home could be medicine. I specialized in transforming difficult spaces, tiny apartments, awkward layouts, rooms with bad light or strange angles. The projects other designers didn't want became my specialty because I understood what it meant to take something broken and make it whole. Christine eventually offered me a full partnership in her firm. At 24, I became the youngest partner at Holloway & Chen Design. We dropped the co. and added my name. My mother would have loved the prestige of it, I thought sometimes, but she didn't know it existed. We'd spoken only twice since that phone call about my father. Once when my grandmother died. I sent flowers but didn't attend the funeral. And once when Victoria got engaged, and my mother called to ask if I'd be her sister's maid of honor. I'd said no as gently as I could, and the line had gone quiet before she hung up without saying goodbye. The firm grew. We hired 2 junior designers, moved to a larger studio in Chelsea, started taking on commercial projects. I was making real money now. Enough to move into a 1-bedroom in Brooklyn with actual windows and natural light. I bought art for my walls. Real furniture instead of thrift store finds. I could afford to eat at nice restaurants, to take weekends off, to live without constantly calculating every dollar. But success brought its own complications. The more visible I became, the harder it was to stay hidden from my past. My full name was attached to articles now, to my firm's website, to award nominations. It was only a matter of time before someone from my old life found me. It happened on a Wednesday in October. I was at the studio when our receptionist told me, Someone was here to see me. No appointment. When I walked to the lobby, Victoria was standing there. She looked the same, but different. Still beautiful, still perfectly put together in expensive clothes. But there was something brittle around her eyes. She smiled when she saw me. That practiced smile I remembered so well. "Hi, Mara." "Victoria, what are you doing here? Can we talk? Maybe get coffee?" Every instinct told me to say no, to protect the life I'd built from the people who'd made me feel small. But curiosity won. We walked to a cafe 2 blocks away, neither of us speaking until we were seated with our drinks. "You look good," she said finally. "Successful." "Thank you. How did you find me?" "I saw an article about your firm. I've been following your work, actually, for a while now." That surprised me. "Why?" She looked down at her latte, and for the first time, I saw something real in her expression. Shame, maybe, or regret. "I owe you an apology. Several. Actually, for the party. For everything." She met my eyes. "I was cruel to you, Mara. For years. I didn't see it then, but I see it now." I didn't know what to say. I'd imagined this conversation so many times, but now that it was happening, the words I'd rehearsed felt empty. "Why now?" I asked. She was quiet for a long moment. "My engagement ended. Turns out he was cheating on me for most of our relationship. And when it all fell apart, I realized I didn't have anyone to talk to. No real friends, just people who liked what I projected. Mom and Dad kept trying to fix it, to make it better, but they couldn't. And I kept thinking about you. How you left and built this whole life without us, without needing us." "I needed you," I said quietly. "I just needed you to see me." "I know. I do now." Her eyes were wet. "That party, your 18th birthday. I think about it all the time. How could I have been so selfish? How could Mom and Dad have let that happen? They didn't even see it as a problem. That was the problem." She nodded. "Everything was always about me. I knew it, and I liked it. I thought that was just how it was supposed to be. I was the successful one, the perfect one, and you were—" She trailed off. "The invisible one." "Yeah." She wiped at her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Mara. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed you to know that I see it now. What we did to you." What I did. We sat in silence for a while, the cafe noise filling the space between us. Part of me wanted to accept her apology, to rebuild something. But another part, the part that had survived 3 years alone in a city that tried to break me, knew that some distances are permanent. "I appreciate you saying that," I finally said. "I do, but I can't go back, Victoria. That version of me, the one who waited for you all to notice her, she doesn't exist anymore. I'm not asking you to come back. I just wanted you to know that you were right to leave, and that I'm proud of what you've built." She stood up. "I should go. I needed to say it in person." She walked away. I watched her walk out of the cafe, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not forgiveness exactly, but something like release. The anger I'd carried for so long, the hurt that had driven me onto that bus all those years ago, it didn't have the same weight anymore. That night, I finally turned my phone back on, the old number I'd kept dead for years. Messages flooded in, years of texts I'd never read. But there was one from just a few hours ago, from my father. "Your mother told me Victoria found you. I'm glad you're okay. I'm proud of you, too, even if I don't have the right to say that anymore." I stared at those words for a long time. They didn't fix anything. They didn't erase the years of being overlooked. But they were something, an acknowledgement, a crack in the wall. I wrote back a single sentence. "Thank you. That means more than you know." It wasn't reconciliation, but maybe it was a beginning. 6 months later, Holloway & Chen Design was approached by a major architecture magazine to be featured in their annual Rising Stars issue. They wanted to do a full profile, my story, my design philosophy, photos of our best projects. It was the kind of exposure that could transform a small firm into something bigger. The writer they sent was sharp and thorough. She interviewed me for hours, asking about my influences, my process, and, inevitably, about my background. I'd always been vague about why I'd come to New York, where I'd grown up. But something about the way she asked made me decide to tell the truth. I told her about the party, about being invisible, about walking away with nothing but a bus ticket and a refusal to stay small. She listened without interrupting, her recorder spinning quietly on the table between us. "That must have taken enormous courage," she said when I finished. "It didn't feel like courage at the time. It felt like survival. Isn't that what courage is?" The article ran that spring. The photos were beautiful, showcasing the industrial yet warm aesthetic of our studio and several of our residential projects. But it was the personal story that people responded to. The headline read, "The Designer Who Built Herself from Silence." The piece opened with the story of the party, then traced my journey through New York. How I'd turned my own experience of displacement into a design philosophy centered on creating spaces where people could become themselves. It talked about my work with clients who were in transition, divorcees, immigrants, people starting over, and how I specialized in making them feel seen. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My inbox flooded with messages from strangers who'd had similar experiences, who'd felt invisible in their own families, who'd left or were thinking about leaving. Design publications reached out for follow-ups. Potential clients contacted us faster than we could respond. Within a week, we had a waiting list 6 months long. But the message that mattered most came from an unexpected source: my mother. She called late one evening. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "I read the article," she said, without preamble. Her voice was thick, like she'd been crying. "The one in Architecture Quarterly." "Oh, I didn't know, Mara. I didn't know that's how you felt. About the party, about everything." "Mom? No, please, let me say this. I've been thinking about it constantly since Victoria visited you, and reading your words in that magazine, seeing it from your perspective." She broke off. "I failed you. We failed you. We were so focused on Victoria's light that we didn't see we were keeping you in shadow." I closed my eyes, feeling tears I didn't know I'd been holding back. "I'm not asking you to forgive us," she continued. "I know we don't deserve that, but I needed you to know that I see it now. What we did, what I did, and I'm so, so sorry." "I don't know what to say, Mom." "You don't have to say anything. She took a shaky breath. "You've built something beautiful, honey. Not just the work you do, but the life you've created. You did that without us, despite us, and I'm proud of you, even if I lost the right to say that a long time ago." Period. We talked for over an hour that night, not fixing everything, not even coming close, but starting something. A conversation that might eventually lead to something like healing. She told me about my father's recovery, about how the heart attack had changed him, made him more reflective, about Victoria's struggles to figure out who she was without the constant admiration she'd built her identity around, about their own marriage, how they'd realized they'd spent decades performing instead of living. "We're in therapy now," she said, "your father and I, trying to figure out how we became these people." "That's good, Mom. I'm glad. Would you ever consider coming home? Just for a visit?" I thought about it. About the house I'd fled from, the rooms that held so many painful memories. But I also thought about the work I'd done, the person I'd become. Maybe I was strong enough now to go back without losing myself. "Maybe," I said. "Not yet, but maybe someday." That's more than I dared hope for. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment, looking out at the Brooklyn skyline twinkling in the darkness. The city that had once terrified me now felt like home. I'd built this life from nothing, from anger and hurt and the desperate need to be seen. And now, finally, I was... Not because my family had changed, not because Victoria had apologized or my mother had finally understood, but because I built something that couldn't be ignored, that couldn't be overshadowed. I designed my own life with the same care I brought to every client project, intentionally, authentically, with attention to light and space and the way things make you feel. I opened my laptop and started working on a new project proposal, a community center in the Bronx, a space for teenagers who were aging out of foster care, a place designed specifically to help people who'd never had a home figure out what home could mean. As I sketched the initial layouts, I thought about the girl who'd walked out of her own birthday party 6 years ago. She'd been so angry, so hurt, so desperate to disappear. But she'd also been brave in a way she didn't recognize at the time. She'd understood something crucial, that sometimes, to find yourself, you have to get lost first. That sometimes the only way to build a home is to leave the one you were given and start from nothing. The work I did now, helping people create spaces where they could become themselves, it all came from that night. From understanding what it meant to be unseen and choosing to make yourself visible anyway. This is Revenge Stories, a home for quiet courage and true endings. If you feel my words, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Help us build this community so we can bring more interesting and exciting stories for you from around the world. Your help is much appreciated. Your voice matters here. Your story matters too. The years continued to pass. I never did move back to Charlotte, but I started visiting. Awkward dinners at first, stilted conversations where we all tried too hard, but gradually something like a relationship emerged. Not the family I'd once wanted, but something real. Something built on honesty instead of performance. Victoria and I would never be close. Not the way sisters in movies are close. But we found a kind of respect for each other. She'd started working as a consultant, helping influencers understand the emptiness of building a life around other people's approval. I learned from the best, she'd told me once, gesturing at me. You showed me what it looks like to be real. My parents aged into softer versions of themselves. My father took up painting, of all things, filling canvases with colors he'd never had time to notice before. My mother volunteered at a women's shelter, helping people rebuild their lives after leaving difficult situations. Sometimes I wondered if she saw me in their stories. As for me, Holloway and Chen continued to grow. We won awards, hired more staff, took on bigger projects. But I also made sure to keep taking the small jobs, the people with limited budgets and big dreams. Those were the clients that reminded me why I'd started. On my 30th birthday, I threw myself a party. Not a huge one, just my team from the firm, some close friends I'd made over the years, and yes, my family. All of them flew up to New York for it. We gathered in the studio I'd designed for myself, a light-filled space in a converted warehouse with exposed brick and huge windows overlooking the East River. The cake said, Mara, in simple letters. No one else's name, just mine. As I looked around at the people who'd helped me build this life, who'd seen me when I needed to be seen, who'd helped me learn that I was enough exactly as I was, I felt something I'd spent most of my life chasing. I felt home, not in a place, but in myself, in the knowledge that I'd survived the worst thing I could imagine, being erased from my own story, and I'd rewritten it anyway, on my own terms, in my own words. My mother approached me near the end of the evening, a glass of champagne in hand. I've been thinking about that night, she said quietly, your 18th birthday. If I could go back? You can't, I said gently. None of us can, but we can start from here. She nodded, tears in her eyes. You've become extraordinary, Nara. And you did it despite us, not because of us. I'll carry that regret forever. Then let it go, I said. Use it to be better now. That's all any of us can do. She hugged me then, and I let her. Not because everything was fixed, but because holding on to anger was exhausting, and I'd built too much beauty to let bitterness poison it. As the party wound down and people started to leave, I stood alone for a moment by the windows, looking out at the city lights. This place that had once seemed so big and terrifying now felt like home. I'd arrived here with nothing, running from pain, and I'd built a whole life. Not the one I'd imagined as a girl, but something better, something real. My phone buzzed with a message from a new client, a young woman who'd just left home after feeling invisible her whole life. She'd read my story and wanted help designing her first apartment. "I want a space where I can finally see myself," she'd written. "I think you understand what that means." I smiled and typed back, "I do, and I'd be honored to help you build it." Because that's what we do, those of us who've had to build ourselves from silence. We reach back and we help others find their voice. We create spaces, physical and emotional, where people can finally breathe, where they can finally be seen. NP. I looked back at my party, at the people laughing and talking in the space I'd created, and I felt a profound sense of peace. This was my revenge, not against my family, but against the invisibility they'd wrapped me in. I'd taken that silence and I'd filled it with beauty. I'd taken that emptiness and I'd built a home. Not the home I'd left, but the one I'd always needed. And in the end, that was more than enough. It was everything.